G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. G'day everyone, welcome back to the Financial Bloke's Wealth and Wisdom Podcast. Today, we've got Angus Street with us. He's the CEO of AuctionsPlus Australia, a company I'm sure you'll all know. He's a self-confessed tech geek who loves and is focused on innovation. He's a leader in the ag industry and's got a really big future ahead of him. Angus and I are going to start talking off today about ChatGPT 3, which is a really innovative, new, game-changing technology that's just hit the world. We're going to briefly touch on that, and then we're going to talk about how AgTech, or how Angus sees AgTech, is going to impact the ag industry over the next 10 to 20 years. So strap yourself in. Welcome, Angus.
Hey, Ben. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Angus, we had you at the live 3-hour event probably about 6 months ago now, and we had you on the panel and we talked about innovation and a whole lot of other topics. But I've got you back because we want to deep dive a little bit more into technology. And I think you're a self-confessed tech nerd. I think you used the word back in the day. Mm-hmm. And my wife's a tech nerd too, so I understand how those brains think. So can you just start off, mate, to give us a bit of a brief background on yourself and how you became the CEO of AuctionsPlus?
So I'm a bush kid. I grew up in northern New South Wales in a little country town called Murrundi, which is between Tamworth and Scone. And I was fortunate enough to head down to Sydney and do boarding school down there and do university there and up on the Gold Coast. And then I fell into journalism. Was the first job that I kind of fell into, and I thought I wanted to be one of those travelling journalists that travel the world and write for Australian Geographic or, the National Geographic. And but the reality of that didn't really eventuate. So I travelled a lot, but I gave up the journalism gig. I worked for Meat and Livestock Australia for a number of years. I worked for Hort Innovation in a fund management role. I've had my own businesses, everything from a management consulting company and a tech company, and then was fortunate enough to land a gig at AuctionsPlus. I started here on a contract role when there was about 23 people in the business as the title was National Sales and Marketing Manager, and I came in underneath Anna Spear, who was a good friend and mentor at the time and is still very much a good friend and mentor. And I was there for a year and a bit, and then I guess right place, right time. Anna moved on to AACO, and I applied for the CEO role, and that was circa 5 years ago, roundabout. And since then, it's been an incredible journey. We've taken the business from those 25 people to 80. We grew it significantly through product development, market development. Yeah, it's been an amazing ride. Driven a lot by external factors. And for us as a business, I'm most proud that I use the phrase, we were given the football and we didn't drop it. And now as a business, we're focusing on how do you play the second half of football, a little bit more strategically instead of flashy and fast like we have over the last couple of years of COVID.
I appreciate that. And it's a great story. I know you've done a few podcasts on your really long story, and It's great to listen to. So if anyone out there, Google your story. We're not here to talk about that today. We're digging into technology, but it's a great story, mate. I love it. And Murrundi is only sort of 20 minutes, half an hour from where I grew up at Corindi. So, we didn't grow up too far from each other.
God's country, Ben.
Yeah, well, that's what my dad tells me. I tell him God's country's in Queensland, and we always have that fight. Don't worry.
I get that.
Now, mate, where we're going with this is, Jeff Birchnell, who's another mutual friend of ours, 3R Cattle Co., and he said something to me once, which was the rate of change in ag has never been this fast and it will never be this slow again. And I think couldn't be more true than ever at the moment. And where I started thinking about we should go with this podcast is I ran into something called ChatGPT ChatGPT 3 it's called, I believe, about 6 months ago, and it right away caught my attention. I was like, holy shit, this looks like a seismic shift in technology. And, a lot of people are saying this could be the very first glimpse of general artificial intelligence, very early stages, but still that's there. And it made my head spin with all the potential changes we'd see. Now, it's been getting some, real airtime in the media now. So obviously it's starting to become mainstream. and people are paying attention. And now I reckon ChatGPT 3 is just the beginning. That's the sense I get. And so what I want to start off this with, mate, is as the CEO of an AgTech company, and a self-confessed techie, are we on the verge of an acceleration or leap in tech? And how do you think that's going to play out in the ag space?
It's a good question, Ben, and I'm glad you gave me a bit of a heads up on what you were going to ask, because I think I've pondered on it over the last couple of days driving through the New England. And for me, I don't think it's going to be an acceleration, but I do think it's going to be a step change. So to your second point, it is going to be a dynamic leap forward in the technology capabilities that ag tech companies are going to consider. The gap for me, and the bit that I'm really excited to see, is how do you take this technology and actually put it into a service offering for farmers for the ag supply chain, because it is in its infancy as a core technology, and there's some really exciting applications that it can be used for now, but there's also some applications which, you follow the threads of what people are using ChatGPT with and for, and some of those applications are very much still in its infancy. So I think how you think about the technology as a service offering or a way to integrate and engage with software, I think that is a really great place to start for agricultural tech companies or food tech companies to consider. So how can you take, the huge amount of data that these ag tech companies are capturing or have stored, and how can you use the capabilities of ChatGPT, merge the data sources together, and actually create a better user experience? Because when it comes to tech, one of the differentiating factors for those that are successful versus not, I believe, really comes down to user experience. And ChatGPT has the opportunity to enhance that user experience if it's used correctly and in the right way.
Yeah. Do you want to, I just thought we probably should have done that to start with, because we're not here to talk specifically about ChatGPT, but for anyone that doesn't know what ChatGPT is, they might have been living under a rock, but let's assume they don't know. Can you give us, being a tech man, just a quick summary on what ChatGPT is, mate?
Yeah, it's essentially, in layman's terms, is, when you jump onto the internet and onto a website and there's a chatbot in the corner there, it's a highly advanced chatbot that the chatbots on an AuctionsPlus website or on most tech websites have a standard algorithm of answering. Or when you jump onto a bank's chatbot, hi, you will get the same questions asked of you, and it takes you through a very standard workflow. And it's not necessarily using data and an algorithm to customize its response to you. It's a standardized response workflow. What ChatGPT does is it is personalized communication from the digital world back to you. So therefore, you can ask it pretty much anything you want. It goes out, grabs huge amounts of data sources and data points, and comes back with a personalized answer, as opposed to stepping through a workflow, which is what most chatbots do. So to your point earlier, artificial intelligence, like that first bit, it does feel like if you're asking some of the questions, we've had to play with it here internally, and some of the questions you do ask it, you feel like you are talking very much to a robot. Like, you see those sci-fi movies and it is coming back to you with just some amazing responses and very human responses.
Linguistically correct.
Yeah. And what I think is fascinating about it is when you talk to somebody in real life, you start to get layers of context and color, which you don't get over text, so to speak, like a text message or an email. And quite often, when somebody puts an exclamation mark into an email, they're like, are they mad at me? Are they excited? I can't kindly get that. What's the color and context around their communication? But ChatGPT gives you that color and context back, which is a really cool experience. So it's in its infancy and some wonderful applications will come out of it. But yeah, I think it's how that is rolled out in ag is going to be really interesting and exciting to see.
It will be. And the way I first tested it was I had a mate of mine, we were talking about writing an article, and it was a leadership and management article. And I essentially just typed in, write me a 500-word article on leadership in the agricultural industry, and bang, it just popped out a 500-word article on that exact topic, and it was unbelievable. I read it and went, that did a far better job than I could. And not that I'm the yardstick of quality, but yeah, it was really good. And then things like I'd type in there, come up with an article title based on this topic, and it was just amazing what it popped out with. It was great.
Yeah, and I think the thing is interesting is there's a lot of these applications that have over probably the last decade on the internet, done tiny bits of it. Like there's like websites where it's like come up with 10 cool podcast names, right? And you put in the topics and it kind of spits it out. And there's a lot of people been tinkering in this space, but this is the first time that they've been able to pull it all together and actually execute it in a really meaningful way. Hence why it's getting the hype that it's getting.
Yeah, it's a leap in what's available. And I suppose it's just not a symptom. Maybe the symptom's the right word, Angus. It's just a symptom of how quickly things are changing. And, I had a conversation yesterday with someone from a produce company, and they're essentially they go out and spray farmers, properties and fertilise and all that sort of stuff. And they've just invested in some drones. And these drones, I think they said, would carry a 50-kilo bag. Hopefully I've got my facts right, but a 50-kilo bag around and spray that, or drop the fertiliser or spray 50 kilos worth of spray out on the country via maps, and they'd have 2 or 3 going at a time, one out doing it, one coming back, one recharging, and one filling up and going again. And it was just like, holy dooly. And they said the problem is the tech, by the time they've got these new drones in and they've trained with them and they've got them working and using them with the farmers, all of a sudden new tech's come out to replace that. And they said whether to invest the money in that tech now, knowing that, in 6 months, 12 months' time, it's going to have to be completely replaced. So it is definitely a changing landscape. So, mate, you're watching this space really closely, aren't you? And so, from AuctionPlus's point of view, I know you said in the interview we did before was about data was the big thing, is, rural producers being able to collect data, analyse data, having that thing. Is that still what you're seeing is the big vision of the future of what's going to be the big challenge of the tech industry to deliver value?
Yeah, I think the more we look into it, and I know a lot of tech, AgTech companies look into it, is what underpins future success or future iterations of their tech company. And quite often it comes down to, the data that is being captured or the data that is being ingested, manipulated, stored and presented back to a farmer or a supply chain participant. So I think data definitely will be the underpinning link, I guess, of a lot of innovation in AgTech. There's a couple of hurdles to overcome, which is the interoperability of the applications and the companies that have been developed. If we go back maybe 7 to 10 years ago, when AgTech, there was that AgTech boom and there was lots of AgTech companies coming up with lots of, someone said it to me yesterday, they were finding solutions. So they had a solution, but they were looking for a problem. And they came to agriculture and said, I've got a solution, I just don't know where the problem is yet. And so there was a lot of those companies that came to agriculture. And I think over the last 10 years, a lot of those, have gone back to other companies, have gone back to other sectors, and the evolution of the AgTech sector has really matured. And so now there's, not a handful, but there's those that have been able to work through the cycles over the last decade, work with customers over the past decade, now have a really good core product and a good understanding of the service and the solution that is solving a customer need or want. So you now have businesses that have survived, that first frenzy of which happens in most kind of tech booms. There's the fintech boom at the moment. There's lots of conversation around sustainability tech, which is everything from ESG monitoring through to carbon capturing, through to benchmarking. So I think there's sustainability tech is very much a hot topic, and that's probably the next. So you've got to get through that frenzy to have a good product that customers are actually willing to pay for. So you then get through it, and you find that businesses have not siloed themselves down, but have been working on their product and their customer base. And then all of a sudden, customers' needs are changing and customer expectations are changing. And they now want this application to talk to this application. And I want data that I capture, in my soil monitoring to be available in my farm management software app. And then I want that farm management software app to be available in a data dashboard. And then I want to be able to pass that to my agent or send it up to the processor. I want to receive information back. So all of a sudden, the solutions are now, customers are now expecting everybody to start to talk together. And so I think we've got to overcome what that interoperability looks like. And that's the exciting bit for us, because I think when we unlock that, it's going to add huge amount of value back to our mutual customer base, which is the farmer.
It seems to me that there's a convergence of two or three things, Angus. One is there's a generational change. So the younger generations coming through now who have grown up with computers, technology, and it just becomes expected and it's part of what they do. So they're demanding this. Number two is the internet. I mean, I now do Zoom meetings and Skype meetings and Teams meetings with video with people that are in the absolute middle of nowhere that don't even have mobile service with Starlink. And, they're sitting in their kitchen or in their office on the farm, and I'm sitting in mine, and we're having a conversation like this, clear as a bell in front of each other, no delays, no lags, no nothing, which means the connectedness of all this technology is so quick now. And the third one seems to be, to me, is like with ChatGPT, we've hit this point where there's such a large amount of data and we're getting this processing power there that we're almost getting to the point where that connectivity is actually going to be computer driven. So rather than humans having to sit around and go, how do we make this work? We're going to have these general artificial intelligences that we say, hey, we've got these two software programs, somehow in the tech world, they dump it in and say, how do we make this work? And then the general artificial intelligence goes, oh, that's easy, Ben. This is how you do it. Rather than, IT people having to slog it out. And then it becomes far, far cheaper to have that happen. Is there other variables, do you think, mate?
No, you hit the nail on the head. And it's funny, I was like, what's driving the change? And I had changing customer expectations, user experience from a connectivity piece, and then, the data connectivity piece, or the data sharing and the data interoperability. I think the bit that, to me, that I kind of then drew a squiggle down is really sums it all up for me, is a frictionless experience. And frictionless technology is now an expectations of consumers. They get it when I jump into Facebook and I post something in Facebook. I can also share it in Instagram. I can tag this in, I can do that. So there's a great analogy, or actually a great bit of science done around, it's called the Schlepp analysis. And essentially, Schlepp is, I don't know where it comes from as a word, but essentially dragging a bag of seed from point A to point B and point A to point B. I'm just continually doing the same thing over and over again. And then someone turns up with a wheelbarrow and it's like, well, I can put 2 bags in, and suddenly, becomes a little bit more friction. And then somebody goes, well, why don't we put a conveyor belt, and all you got to do is load the grain in and it just goes along from point A to point B. And then someone says, well, why is point A here and why can't we put point A next to point B? And so I think the removing of the schleps that happen in agriculture and then AgTech, there's going to be a convergence of, well, we can remove that through technology enabling that. And then the technology is going to have to get better, and its customer experience is going to have to get better, because I don't want to be copy pasting an Excel spreadsheet from here and dropping it to there and then selecting in line. And, I want to go bang, oh, it's in. Like I dropped it and it's in. So I think creating frictionless experiences for agriculture is what a lot of people are talking about in the AgTech world. And that is driven by data underpinning a lot of that. And then it comes down to individual companies lifting their UX capabilities. And I mean, it sounds very simple. There's a lot of moving pieces, but I think it's a really exciting stage for AgTech in Australia, because once you start to remove the friction, then you can add in so much more value to the farmer. Everything from, you can integrate finance, you can integrate insurance, you can integrate new tools, you can integrate, suddenly I've got 2 applications talking. Well, that creates, another 1 + 1 gives us 3. And I don't think as an AgTech community, we've unlocked that potential. I think there's a lot of integrations which are happening, but there is huge amount of potential to unlock.
Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode. What about capital inflow? I mean, that's, when you look at someone who wants to say the number of people that might buy an iPhone, there's billions of people on the earth that might buy an iPhone. So, of course, money's going to flow into that, isn't it? Because they're going to go, wow, if we build the next iPhone and take market share off Apple, we'll get billions, whereas agriculture is a far smaller space. Mm-hmm. Is there still, in your eyes, plenty of money flowing into the ag tech or the ag development space at the moment, or is it still starved for capital?
I think there's certainly capital out there for the right businesses and business models. I think the sexiness of ag tech, as I said 10 years ago, has it's probably actually become a sexier sector to play in, if I'm honest with you, because it's matured more. So because it's matured more and the businesses that are starting up or scaling up actually have learnt from, have a few scars over the last 10 years, investors are more confident investing in now than I believe in previous years. So yeah, there's certainly capital flowing in for the right businesses. I was reading, I think yesterday, a company called Loam, which is a sustainability tech company that invests in biologicals. I think I'm going to get it all wrong and they'll kill me, but essentially around capturing carbon in the soil through fungi. And I think it was $110 million, was invested in this company. It was announced yesterday. And so, that's huge for an Aussie tech company, ag tech company, to get that inflow of capital.
But that's not a traditional tech, is it? Like that's not like, we've got this robot that's going to go out on farm and pick, I don't know, mangoes or something like that. This is still tech, but it's not electronic tech, is it?
Yeah, and I think when people talk tech, they think robots or they think internet or they think an app. I think we have to, I know the sector is broadening its lens on what we think about tech. Tech is, it's R&D, it's novel technologies driven by research and development, and in AuctionsPlus world is we have an R&D budget, which is essentially our product development budget. We have to keep building products and services that add value to our customers. It might not be in the science R&D. It might be in code. It might be, how do we take ChatGPT and plug it into AuctionsPlus? What does that look like? Like that's R&D because it's a novel use of a service. So yeah, I think there is money flowing in, but it's just got to be for the right company.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of it, Angus, seems to be that it's building, as in, this new technology comes out, people adopt it, they see a demand, and they say, okay, how can that be adopted? It's coming from outside of agriculture to inside of agriculture, and then it's being refined and used, and then people start to expect it, and then investors see that there's a demand in the market and, rural producers are using this tech, and then off it starts to go. It's almost like a living, breathing sort of a development, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And a great example of that is kind of fintech in ag. And I think that's one of the new, well, it's probably been around for the last in a couple of years, and it's, there's everybody from livestock finance companies and grain finance companies that are, launching different business models to the traditional banks. There's guys like Hillridge, which, are looking at providing insurance and crop protection. There's guys like Fresh Supply Co, which are really around building, data blocks to validate, a transaction or to support, a transaction. And then at that transaction point, can you actually pre-finance? Can you provide a loan? What are the banks and the financiers looking to in terms of data to put more capital into the supply chain from an agricultural point of view? So I think fintech in ag is a really exciting place, as everything from cash flow management to working capital to debt financing to trade loans. I think there's huge opportunity there, and it's around, and it happens in other sectors. How can you kind of grease the value chain by adding value at the appropriate points? And obviously capital does that.
It's reducing friction.
Yeah, exactly right.
And it's interesting. I personally think this is nothing new, so it's not like rocket science, and it's not too sexy, but I just see so much friction in the money side of things, working out, for example, benchmarking, am I doing well? Am I doing bad? Where am I doing well? Where could I improve? The data just doesn't flow through anywhere. Everyone's got individual software packages that have to go to the accountant, and then they've got to be massaged and changed. And then they want to go to their bank and they've got to do these manual budgets, and it doesn't tie back into their financials. I imagine a world in probably 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, 30 years, I don't know, where literally you're running your rural production business, you sit down in front of your computer or your tablet and you look at it and go, okay, fair enough, how am I going? And, there's little red flags. They're saying, your kilos per hectare of beef is below the average norm for this, or, your rainfall's been this, so this is where you should be at too. You say, geez, we're going to have a cash flow shortfall coming up in a couple of months. You press a button, goes through to your bank. Your bank says, yep, approved based on that. There just seems to be so much friction in that space, and no tech providers have been able to provide some sort of solution to that at all. There's the individual standalone packages and products, but it just doesn't all flow through. And I reckon, again, that big data processing, if they can turn that into that side of things, whether it be ag or any industry, if you've got a tie manufacturing business or a factory, how cool would that be to have the data? It'd just be like a dashboard on your tractor. Is the engine overheating? What's the oil pressure doing? And you can make small little tweaks that can have a massive difference on your profit and your survivability.
You summed it up, and I think you look at some of the look at the banking sector and the flow of data between, our tax records and the banking sector now, and mortgage broking and financial advisors. And all of a sudden, you go back 5 years ago, even when I was trying to apply for a home loan, it just was it was so cumbersome. You had to manually download, copy paste, spreadsheets and drop them in and then go through line by line. And now, a couple of clicks of the button and, data starts to flow between all of the relevant sources that you need to apply for a home loan. So I do believe there's baby steps occurring, but your example there, that I think is the future of agriculture and AgTech, is that connectiveness and making it a frictionless experience. The sooner we can get there, I think we as a sector unlock a huge amount of value.
I agree. I do have a question for you because I'm intrigued about this. And when I found ChatGPT 3, and I keep going on about that because I feel like a monkey that's just, found fire. I'm jumping around, super excited. I've just found fire. And everyone else is going, yeah, that's been around for millions of years, Ben. But what I'm probably getting at is, from your point of view, mate, when you're looking here, what's the stuff that excites you? And you'd sit down on the weekend with your cup of coffee while the kids are playing sport and go, geez, I've really got to do a bit of research on this and find out more.
Yeah, I touched on it before that the sustainability tech piece, I think, is really exciting, and I'm personally extremely interested in it, but I think as a business, we're also investigating it. And I think the reason I'm interested in it is there's a lot of conversations around natural capital, and you have, the farm is an asset class, And then you have the inventory, which is your animals or your pineapples or your eggs or your chickens as another asset class. And then you were doing all of these on-farm practices, which some people are doing them for carbon projects, to get, and I think carbon is obviously now is its own asset class, but there are those businesses that are adopting all of these new sustainability practices on farm that might not necessarily be able to apply for a soil carbon project or one of the carbon projects like a tree planting project or a regenerative project, but are still doing all of these practices, which is investing into the natural capital of their farm. So how can you take those practices, because we do know that it is from a environmental, from a social, from a governance, from an animal welfare point of view, from a community point of view, there's a huge amount of value there. It's just not being captured. And I don't know how to, create an asset class for it. It probably is an asset class for it, but it's how can you allow farmers who are doing these sustainable farming practices, how do you give them the opportunity to potentially show the value that they've put into their produce or their farm and maybe get some return for it down the supply chain or at a point of liquidation where they might sell the property? I think that's a really interesting piece for me, because I think you're seeing a huge trend in farmers adopting, regenerative ag practices, rotational grazing, cell grazing, natural resource management, holistic farming practices. I think you want to almost return the favour, and give back to these producers, because they are, they're not just kind of pillaging the land anymore. There's been a seismic shift, I believe, and I think there's a role technology can play there.
I agree. And look, there's huge amounts of money flowing into that space. I've got a mate that works as a manager in a hedge fund over in London, and I chatted to him a few months ago, and I reached out and I said, are you getting any information coming through on natural capital and carbon and those sorts of things? And he said, we're not investing in it because that's not our mandate. He said, but I get at least 2 projects come across his desk every week. And that's huge. So that's a big thing for them to be getting that where they are. And look, I think there's 2 reasons that's really good for ag. Is one is, farmers and graziers can start to be, I suppose you'd say, rewarded for the natural capital that they're looking after, because, the vast majority of rural producers love their land, love the animals on their land and want to look after it. They've just never been paid for it. And now we're getting into a point where society's saying, we value this. This is what we want to achieve. So there has to be a reward for farmers to do that. Secondly, I think, farming's been painted as a villain in many corners of the world. And I think that the technology that comes in to be able to measure that biodiversity or that natural capital, we've got some platypus, we've got some koalas, we've got, clean water, we're, managing the soil health, etc. I think if we can start to measure that and sell that story as well, that protects the industry from overzealous regulation. Because if you've got data to be able to go, hey, this is the sheer volume of natural capital that our farmers are managing, this is what we need to pay for, or they're not the villains that they're being portrayed to be. Like, we have this one-dimensional conversation about methane with cattle. It's like, oh, they fart, they release methane, this is bad. But then we don't have the conversation about, well, a grazing operation can, sequester carbon back into the soil and how great that is for the environment. And I think you're right, mate. It does tick off the boxes for me that it's an opportunity for ag to be able to I suppose, defend themselves, I suppose is the word I'm looking for, against poor and overzealous regulation.
Yeah, I think there's, you look globally and there's lots of regulation, posed on it. I know New Zealand's got some, recent regulation, and there's a lot happening in Europe. I'm not too across it, but I think, there's 2 points there. And the second point I'll start with, which is just storytelling, right? Like, there's words like storytelling, there's words like provenance, but now in terms of if you are telling, doing storytelling, you need data to validate those stories. So I think it's still a story, but it's just having the evidence and the data to validate the stories is the second piece. And I think that then goes back to, when we talk reward, it might not even be in, from a monetary sense, reward. It might just be, market access. It might be the ability to just show people that I love the land. That's sometimes enough for farmers and graziers, And then if there is opportunity, great. But I think, it's around what is a technology system that allows farmers and graziers to show the value of their entire enterprise apart from just the land that they hold on the balance sheet, the inventory that they hold on the balance sheet, because it is so much more to them than just those two things.
So, mate, we're starting to come up towards the end of the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the AgTech story, shall I say?
Not a huge amount, Ben. I've kind of chewed your ear off over the last 40 minutes. I think what I would say is that it's a really exciting space. And if a producer or a grazier is unsure around what technology to consider, what technology means, we've talked everything from loam through to software, through to robots, through to ChatGPT. I think the first thing I would do is ask for some help and ask. A lot of these AgTech companies have great support teams, and if you don't know where to start or you've started and you're struggling, I would recommend, reaching out and talking to people. There's organisations like MLA, there's the Australian AgTech Association. A lot of these companies also have support teams, as I said, and those support teams actually quite often, agriculture is really genuine. They're quite often like, oh, I would use these other products to do that, and you can do this to do that. So the support teams do know all of the other products in the ecosystem and are really open to assisting you, with your decision making. So yeah, ask for help.
I think that's a great one. And also to ask your friends for help. People in the industry, what are they using? Because I know my dad, I'll throw my dad under the bus. I love to do that. He always enjoys it. But I remember a couple of years ago, he put a tank monitor on one of the tanks, or should I say my brother-in-law put the tank monitor on for him. And I remember him at the time thinking, what the bloody hell do I want this for? And it's just a really simple one where it measures what's in the tank. And he's got a little monitor in his kitchen that shows how full the tank is. And then when it gets below a certain level, it kicks the pump in, and the pump in the submersible pump starts pumping up to the tank. And he loves it now. And it was only that someone else suggested there might be a solution for him. And now he's thinking about all the other ways he could, other tanks he could fix or water troughs. So sometimes it's about just asking your friends and other people in the industry, what are you using and is it saving time? And just start small, like just implement something little, give it a go, see what you feel, and then slowly get used to it over time.
Agree.
Awesome. Now, mate, before we go, I want to ask you one last question, and I ask all my guests this. What's your definition of true wealth?
I would say a happy and healthy family for me. Yeah, smiles on my kids' faces is a priceless kind of experience, and a wife that is happy and healthy and enjoying life. You can't, you write blank checks for those two things in my mind.
Absolutely. That's a great one. Happy wife, happy life, eh?
Happy kids, happy life.
Yeah. Because I think you said you got a 5 and a 6-year-old. Well, I've got a 6-year-old, so I know exactly how hard that sometimes is.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, look, mate, I know how busy you are. I don't want to take up any more of your time. You've been extremely generous with us all. You're one of the stars in the ag industry. You've got a great story, mate, and I'm really privileged that you came on the podcast. Thanks for investing your time. And, mate, one day we'll get back and we'll dig into ChatGPT 3 when it becomes ChatGPT 4 maybe.
Jeez. No, thank you, Ben. It's been an absolute honour. Love catching up with you as always. And, ChatGPT 3 or 4, who knows? Hopefully I'm growing grey and old by then. I don't think so, but hopefully.
Well, that was a whole lot of fun. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realise that we're going to see some big changes coming in the AgTech space over the next 10 to 20 years, and I think it's going to be a really exciting time. My biggest takeaway there was what Angus suggested, that we've got to stop thinking about tech just being computers and internet and those sorts of things. Tech is research and development, and I think he's right on there, and I can see some developments coming through that are going to change things for us. The old saying, game changers. And so I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that's sharing the podcast. We've had an absolute record month last month of downloads, and the feedback coming through has been fantastic, especially people coming back and saying, what topics do we want to listen to? What ones were valuable? And as I said, sharing that around, especially on the socials. Now that's it for today. I'll see you with the next episode.